Firstly, I'd like to thank all our friends from the media for attending our PC today. Myself, Zairil, MP for Bukit Medera, and Stephen Sim, MP for Bukit Tajam. We've come all the way from Penang. And with us today are two members of the NGO sector. One is Mr. Daniel Soon from Penang, who is the Executive Director of St. Nicholas Home, St. Nicholas Home for the Blind in Penang. Is a very well-known and established charitable organization in Penang. And on our left is Mr. Moses Chu, Executive Director of the Majlis Kebangsaan Bagi Orang Buta, National Council for the Blind, Malaysia. Okay, so today we'll be talking about the GST. I think as everyone knows, the upcoming implementation of GST on 1st April this year is going to have big impact on Malaysia, especially on our economy, because what it means is that there's going to be 6% tax increase across the board. Yeah, we're going from 0 to 6, and it's a consumption tax, so it's on almost every single goods and services. So almost everything will be affected, which means every Malaysian will be affected. Now, many people have discussed the economic impact of GST, but I think there are few who have noticed the social consequences of GST, especially with regards to its impact on charities and the non-profit sector. I think a lot of people will be surprised to hear that with the implementation of GST, charity will be taxed, okay? Because charities will be subject to GST just like any other businesses. Okay, so as we all know, charity is a social cause and is often undertaken by volunteers and people who are doing work that the government should be doing, but the government is not. So the charity comes in and fills this gap. Yeah, and these kind of activities, of course, should ideally be supported and encouraged by the government. But instead of giving more support, the implementation of GST will actually create more obstacles and make life very difficult and complex for charities. So I will go through some of the GST treatment on charities, and all this information I got from the Royal Malaysian Customs Goods and Services Tax Guide on Societies and Similar Organizations. It's actually a document that was put on their website as of 18 December 2012. So it has basically the guidelines for NGOs and societies, charities, and how they have to comply with GST. And this GST is applicable on all charities and NGOs, including those that are currently enjoying tax-exempt status. So even institutions that are currently tax-exempt, means they don't pay tax and all that, they will be subject to GST. So in effect, they will no longer be tax-exempt. Okay. Now I'll go through exactly how it works. So when it comes to cash donations, as you all know, most of our NGOs, charities, and so on are reliant on donations. Yeah. Okay. When it comes to cash donations, only cash donations without any benefits to the donor is not regarded as taxable supply, and so not covered by GST. So, for example, if I give or a company gives a cash donation and does not receive any publicity or does not receive anything in return, except perhaps a receipt, then that is fine. That is still not taxed. However, if in return for the cash donation, the company receives benefit, and benefit is defined in this guideline as A, advertising or promoting the donor's or sponsor's name on the products or the booklet, for example, or naming the event after the donor or the sponsor, or even displaying the donor's name on t-shirts and so on and so forth. So, for example, if company A donates 1 million to a charity, and then they do the event, and then they put sponsored by company A, then it will be considered commercial value because the company benefits, and so there will be GST tax on the donation. So essentially, I mean, as you all know, in Malaysia, it's very common practice when companies companies give money. Of course, there's usually some publicity and so on, but this publicity will be considered of benefit to the company, and as such will be taxed. And as obviously you can imagine, this will discourage, it will actually increase the cost of donating. Now, that is for cash donation. For donations in kind, let's say they don't give cash but they give goods. In fact, it's even worse, because for donations in kind without benefit, meaning if a company sponsors barang items, and there's no benefit, meaning they don't get any publicity or whatever, you're only not taxed if the gift is up to 500 ringgit a year. Meaning, if a company sponsors, let's say, some equipment or whatever it is, that costs more than 500, it will be taxed. And or if they give 2 times a year, each time is 300 ringgit, that total 600 ringgit it will exceed 500 and also will be taxed. Okay, and then of course for goods that are given, they are donated with benefit. Meaning, for example, if a company gives coffee mugs and the coffee mug has the company logo, that is also taxable. In fact, the tax will be calculated based on the value of advertising space on the mug. So as you can see, it's very complicated. How do you calculate these things also? Then when you come to fundraising events, I think most NGOs, charities, they always have fundraising events or campaigns, awareness campaign and so on, in order not only to raise funds but also to spread their message. Now, here there is tax relief from GST, but only up to 4 events a year. Only up to 4 events a year. From the 5th event onwards, standard rate of GST applies. Now, at the same time, it is not so simple also. To do a fundraising event that is tax exempt, you need to get prior approval from the Director General of Customs. You have to submit the entire list of all the supplies that you intend to sell and do in the event, and then you get approval. And also, the event cannot be organized by a professional fundraiser. It must be organized by by yourself, or if you engage somebody who is professionally organizes fundraising events, there's also GST will apply. It will not be tax exempt. So as you can see, it's very complicated, and it just makes it much more difficult for NGOs to raise funds. And even proceeds from their other activities, a lot of NGOs, in order to meet or supplement their income, they will sometimes rent their halls, for weddings or dinners and so on, or they sell their merchandise, or give treatments, dialysis and so on, or give training workshops, do translation work, maybe give advertising space in their magazines and things. All this will be taxed GST, as long as even ambulance service which is paid, even paid ambulance service will be charged GST. It doesn't matter if all the proceeds will go back to the charity and be used for charitable reasons, it will still be taxed. So I've also, I think in the statement, I've done a table, it'll be easier to see. There's a summary of GST treatment for charities in a table form. So as you can see, I've listed out very clearly, cash donation without benefits, no GST, cash donation with benefits, GST, and so on. I think you can have a look. Now, so as you can imagine from all these things, there's going to be quite a lot of negative impact on charities. Okay? Firstly, GST will make charity more expensive. More expensive in the sense, not only in the sense of higher operational costs, that's for sure, but also in the sense that the act of giving charity also will be more expensive because you have to pay tax. So the cost is added. If last time you give 1 million, now it's going to be 1,060,000. So this may actually discourage contributions, especially all the laws, as I said, with regards to sponsorship by corporates and so on and so forth. The moment the sponsorship is publicized and so on, or if the company name is on a t-shirt or whatever it is, then there's GST, and the charity has to account for the GST. So it's an added cost. And this will actually aggravate the situation of the non-profit sector in Malaysia, which is very cash-strapped, as you know, they don't have much money to begin with. Okay, and actually in Malaysia, unlike other countries, unlike other developed countries, charities receive very little aid from the government. They actually receive very little. I think even St. Nicholas here can tell you that they're actually a very big outfit in Penang. St. Nicholas is running on a very big budget, but they get a very, very, very small grant from the government, from the federal government. So the support from federal government is actually very small. And instead of giving more support, they are actually taking away money from charities. So instead of giving, government will be taking from charity. Yeah? With the GST, this is essentially what will happen, because the government will take a share of the donations and the proceeds and so on, which is meant actually for charity. This is actually an ironic reversal, which will reduce the real value of contributions. I think to continue the rest of it, I'll get YB Stephen. Thanks.
Thank you, Saudara Zairil. The other major negative impact of GST on charity would be increase in the cost of complying with the complex bookkeeping procedure of GST. Not only now charities and non-profit will suffer from cash flow problem because of the reduction in donation now that charity is much more expensive, as was described by Zairil. They will have to be hiring accountants, professionals to maintain and process records in order to claim GST input tax, or even to declare their GST output tax. So there will be increase in operational costs, and finally there will be an increase in the overall cost because of GST, because charities and non-profit, like everyone else in Malaysia, will face cost inflation due to the introduction of this new consumption tax. And because, to make matter worse, because of the peculiar nature of how charities operate, for example, there is an element of volunteerism, it will mean that they will have difficulty in claiming input tax credit. Input tax credit means what you can claim back from whatever has been taxed on business supplies. But because there are elements of, for example, volunteer workers, or even bona fide giving to charity in terms of their operation, these are not covered in the input tax credit. So they will face difficulty in claiming that. And even if they are able to claim input tax, the delay in recouping the refund will actually affect the cash flow of the charity. And all this limitation, we must put it in the context of an overall bleak economic outlook, which will definitely affect contribution and distribution and donation in general. So this limitation will only serve as additional roadblocks, more obstacles, creating tax burden and making charity more expensive than it currently is. So there are a few recommendations that we want to propose to the government. Firstly, of course, as we have always said, the nation is not prepared for GST as of now. Yeah? So, and in light of this negative impact on GSTs on charities and non-profit organizations, the government should consider immediately to defer the implementation of GST until further consultation and until a time when we have become a more mature and high-income nation. In other countries, charities are supported by government. For example, in the US, in Europe, as well as in Singapore, where government actually provides matching grant to charities to support them, but not here in Malaysia. Most charities in Malaysia are dependent on private and corporate sector donations. So we hope that the government will defer GST until until further in the future. Secondly, we know that if the government would be very highly unlikely to defer GST. If GST is going to be implemented anyway, we suggest that government organizations that is already currently enjoying tax exempt status should be exempted from GST, because tax exemption means a recognition of the good positive impact or positive role of charities as public benevolent organizations. So they should be, in principle, be exempted from GST. Tax exempt charities should be exempted from GST. Thirdly, because, as I said, government support is lacking. Most charities are dependent on private and corporate sector donation. And today, most charities do not wait passively for donations to come. Instead, active fundraising is required, and sometimes charity conduct business-like activities such as selling merchandise and providing services such as hall rental. So, and some of these non-profit sustain themselves through cross-subsidy model. when profit is earned from business activities in order to cross-subsidize the disadvantages. So, for example, a dialysis center. A dialysis center may charge commercial rate on to patients who can afford in order to subsidize those who cannot. So, the government should consider such modern setup of charity. I mean, while it is important that government ensure no profiteering occurs behind the facade of charity, genuine charity must be assisted and should not be burdened unnecessarily, in this case, be subjected to GST. So, for this, the government should actually consider creating certain categories for non-profits and organizations and charities so that they will be exempted from from GST altogether. In other words, charities must not be treated like a regular business entity, even if they conduct business-like activities, because their aims and goals are different. And finally, if government is unable to exempt charities from GST for whatever reason, then it should at least increase the taxable threshold to for charities and non-profit to at least 2 million ringgit from the current 500,000 ringgit. This will at least help relieve smaller charities from some of the negative impact discussed earlier. Thank you.
Any question? I think Daniel and Moses to give some input from the NGOs point of view, and after that we'll open the floor for questions. Daniel?
Thank you, YB Jarrell, YB Stevenson. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad for this opportunity to share with you the perspective from an NGO like ours, an NPO like ours, with regard to GST and its impact. Those of us in the non-profit sector, particularly in charities, we have discovered over the last few years the general trend of the donation is declining. And more we are depending on the corporate generosity from corporate entities, companies to come in. And as we know, companies obviously needed to highlight their role in CSR. And CSR is a new how do you say that, brand name for corporate bodies. And of course, if you go and approach an organization or corporate bodies for sponsorship, it's very difficult to say that, for us to say that now pay an additional 6% for GST. So in most likelihood, whatever the corporate giving that comes to us, we will have to absorb the 6% and remit from the amount donated the 6% to the government. So in the end, it will cost. It will take us we have to put more of our effort, instead of serving our client base, put more of our effort into fundraising. Right? So this can create a downward spiral. A lot of the NGOs we are, particularly the smaller ones, are run by generous, kind-hearted people who may not be so professionally qualified as to manage the GST regime required by the government. I think you would agree, even companies are finding it a challenge to manage GST. So if you put that in the context of the MPO in Malaysia, you can imagine the consternation and the fear that GST is creating. So we hope that by highlighting these challenges that charities and NPOs such as St. Nicholas Home are facing, that the government will give special consideration to the plight that faces. Right? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moses?
Thank you for this opportunity. I'm not a good talker, but I know one thing. Most of the things that I want to say has been covered in our two IDs. But I want to re-emphasize on the need of greater consultation, because I'm sure the implementation of GST has not had enough consultation with NGOs. Is it definitely for sure there is a way to apply for exemption 4 times, as was said, but along the way it is going to be difficult to make the application, and no matter what, we will be spending money in services, we will be spending money in goods, So looking at a budget of just 2 million, we will be spending an extra of 120,000 for the year. So I think there has to be greater consultation, and perhaps for the government to come in to see what sort of expenses we do, what sort of financing. And again, the government is encouraging us, at least on the blindness, to encourage employers to employ, and assistive equipment is needed. Yes, there is a way of applying for exemption, but again, I'm not too sure if this exemption is for employers who employ the blind and disabled, because it is only given to the disabled person himself, but all this assistive equipment, a lot of them has got to be covered by employers. So on one hand, you encourage them to employ the disabled, but on the other hand, you are going to tax them an additional 6% whenever they purchase equipment or assistive equipment to employ the blind and other disabilities. Thank you.